Today we are looking at my latest camera purchase, the Panasonic S1 Mark II. Yes, I did fall for all the promotional hype and all the excitement over this new camera, and I am definitely thinking about switching to Lumix as our main camera system. But before we commit to that, I really wanted to properly use this camera along with our S5 Mark II and try and understand whether it is a camera system I would want to fully switch to. Now, I've only had this camera a couple of weeks. I've used it on a holiday trip to Switzerland, as well as a couple of professional jobs. So I haven't had long enough to really make a strong decision about the direction I want to go with this camera. And maybe that says a lot about the current camera situation and the cameras I already own. Let's get the image quality question out of the way first. The picture quality of this particular camera is amazing. It gets incredible results. I've been really impressed about the level of detail, the codec, how much you can push and pull it. It is a great looking image with a huge amount of dynamic range. Now, saying that, all cameras nowadays that can shoot 10-bit and above, I think can produce brilliant professional results. It's not really about the image quality anymore. Of course, a camera like this might give you a little bit extra, but ultimately, it doesn't really matter. If you used any professional camera or even semi-professional camera in the last 5 years, you are probably not going to see a massive upgrade switching to this, and nor are you going to be disappointed with the camera systems that you already own. What's more important, I think, when looking at a new camera system like the S1 Mark II, it's all the other functions and features that these cameras can provide. Is it going to make your shooting experience easier, more profitable, and actually encourage you to go out and shoot more often versus the system that you already own? Does it save those pain points that you currently have with your current system? And that's what I'm really thinking about here when looking at the S1 Mark II. So what do I love about this camera? Well, without doubt, having an open gate sensor is really nice. I do enjoy being able to shoot in all those different codecs and resolutions and different frame rates and different frame sizes, because it just gives you so many different options. There really are no limitations with this camera, and that sometimes can be a bit of a problem as well. Maybe there's just too many options in the menu. I need to go through there and choose the actual specs and resolutions that I'm going to use on a regular basis, because otherwise you just spend ages scrolling through different options, and it's very easy to accidentally switch to a setting you didn't mean to. Now, in terms of the actual feel and build of this camera, I really like the size and shape of it. It feels quite substantial in the hand if you're coming from something like an A7 IV or even the Panasonic S5 II. It's got a bit of weight to it, and it just feels well made. The buttons could be better made. They are a little bit squidgy, and I think if you're coming from Sony systems or Canon, I wouldn't say the build quality is quite as good as them. However, considering the much cheaper price of Panasonic gear, I don't really have any complaints. I think this will last just as well as any other hybrid mirrorless camera setup. I've of course added this cage, which is a small rig cage, and I'll talk more about that in the future. And I just like that because it makes it a bit easier to mount things, as well as giving a bit of additional protection. Now, I'm really loving the 5-way screen that they have on the back. So you can have it like you normally do, where you flip out the screen, point it towards yourself if you need to, whatever. But then you can flip it back on itself and have it set up more like using a camera such as the Blackmagics, where your screen is nice in the center in the middle. It just means you don't have the screen sticking out. It doesn't get in the way of things like the HDMI port and all that. This is the perfect solution. And most camera manufacturers seem to have adopted this in some of their cameras by now, but to be honest, I think this should just be, moving forward, the standard way that all screens are built on the back of mirrorless cameras. Speaking of that screen and that viewfinder, they are glorious. They are really nice and bright, nice and sharp. Especially that viewfinder is super sharp on that, coming from the A7 IV. It's a noticeable upgrade compared to that camera. But just having a back screen as well compared to the Sonys that you can actually see what you're doing on is a big upgrade. And if there was anything out there that would really push me away from Sony right now, I think it might just be the built-in back screen, because it is pretty awful on those cameras. cameras. And then you have other issues when you plug in HDMI on a Sony, which we'll get to in a moment, that you don't get with this particular Panasonic. Having built-in video features like false color is also really nice in a mirrorless camera. I really have missed that in the Sony FX3. False color just makes life so much easier, and especially when you've got such a huge amount of dynamic range like you have in this camera. There were times where I was looking at the screen and thinking it was either too bright or too dark, and yet despite that, it was still showing me that I was well within my exposure range that I wanted to go with. So I think you can really push this camera. You can be pretty bad at exposing and still get a very usable image from the S1 Mark II. Now, I mentioned the thing I don't like about the Sony's, their output of the HDMI and how they display any sort of overlay information. They basically just mirror the screen and give you that really horrible reduced size screen, so you don't even get the full width of your monitor when you output any of the Sony systems. And I think that's a real shame. That's not the case with the Panasonics, and especially this S1 Mark II, I'm glad to say, because actually it has a really nice interface on the HDMI, really small text, keeping it out the way and giving you the full width of the HDMI output. Very similar to actually the Canon C70 that does a similar thing as well. On top of that though, when you go into the menus, rather than going full screen on your external monitor, it actually just comes up as one small section at the same sort of resolution and size. I think this is really smart by Panasonic to do this, because A, it means you don't get any weird resolution size issues like you do if you went full screen, but it also means you can still see the rest of your picture behind the menu as you're going through the settings. And that's really nice to be able to see your image as you're tweaking settings or going through the menu. Now, one thing I haven't used yet on this camera, but I think is going to be really exciting to use on shoots, especially when you don't have your laptop with you, is the ability to plug in an SSD via the USB-C and actually copy your footage straight onto it. Being able to do backups without a computer, I think, is an awesome feature to have. Now, when I briefly played around with this, I noticed that it did want me to format the SSD. I presume it has to be an exFAT to actually work with the Panasonic, which is a little bit of a shame because, of course, if you have your SSD formatted for Mac, then it isn't going to be able to work natively with the camera. And, you know, I don't necessarily want to format a whole SSD every single time I plug it into my Panasonic. So it would probably have to be something that's dedicated to your camera setup. And we'll do a full video talking about how that all works and the pros and cons of using that system. But just the idea of being able to do that, I think, is a really cool feature to include in these cameras. And it's something that really should have been there a long time ago. I'm also really excited about using anamorphic lenses in the future. It's nothing that a client is asking for. It's nothing that actually would make me any more money than we do now. But it's just a fun, creative thing to be able to play around, and having the ability to have that large sensor and do that with the Panasonics is something that I am quite excited by. The autofocus on this camera works a lot better than the S5 Mark II. The S5 II works really well, but this just feels a lot more confident with its autofocus. I still wouldn't say it's quite there yet with Sony. I think they have just nailed it to the point where it's really sticky, works in all situations. Obviously the touch is really easy to do, and that's not quite there yet. It's a bit annoying that if you want to do touch focus, you have to still switch modes. However, it feels like it's a firmware update away from being as good. It's that close, and actually in most situations you're shooting in, it's more than good enough. Now, this camera isn't perfect, and I've mentioned a few things already, but there's a few key things that I really want to point out before we conclude whether I will be switching to this camera system. The first thing that I really noticed was the HDMI lag. This has been a problem that has plagued several Panasonic cameras, including the S5 Mark II that I'm shooting on now. But there are solutions to sort of fix it. If you turn off the sound output to the HDMI, it does seem to improve the lag by a huge amount. Like before turning that off, I would say using an external monitor was pretty much unusable. It was that bad. However, as soon as you turn off the sound output, it's okay. It's not perfect. It still has a bit of a lag, but it's certainly completely usable. Now, that's fine if you're just using an external monitor and you're just shooting something and you just need to be able to see what you're doing. That's not a problem. I could see this being a problem though if this was meant to be your one and only camera and you want to use it for so many different types of shoots. Say you do live events and you need to plug directly into a live mixer and you're doing a multicam setup, then that delay will probably be a big problem for you. Now, if you don't need to send sound down the line, that's not a problem. But if you do need to send sound to the mixer, perhaps you've got a couple of mics plugged into the camera or whatever, and you want to use that audio going into the Vision mixer, that is going to pretty much be unusable and something to be very aware about if you're thinking about picking these cameras up. The other thing that's just a little bit of annoyance for me, and actually my colleague mentioned this as well when we were reviewing, is the placement of the review button. I don't like the fact they put the review button in the top corner there rather than the bottom corner. I know it's something you just get used to, and I just got to get used to that personally, but I just find that a bit frustrating. The only other thing that can be a bit frustrating is the busy menus. Once again, if you've used Blackmagic, they have the absolute perfect menus of any of the camera manufacturers. The menus in the Panasonic system aren't bad. They function perfectly fine, and I guess once you get used to them, you know where everything is. But there's just so much stuff on there. This is, I guess, the problem with Panasonic giving you pretty much everything in a camera you could ever wish for, is that you end up with very bloated menus. And that's not really their fault. That's just the fact that they give you so many options. They really let you do anything you wish. Now, of course, you can set up your own menus. You can tweak your quick menu. And that's what I'd highly recommend do. I'd recommend you spend a bit of time, go through the camera, figure out exactly what things you need quick access to all the time, and create a custom menu so that you don't have to waste too much time going back and forth through all of the very large menus in the Panasonics. And finally, back to that overheating. Has that been a problem? As I mentioned, no, it hasn't. It's been absolutely fine. Now, granted, when I was on holiday, I left the camera on to try and see if it would overheat. It was about 27, 28 degrees in direct sunlight. But of course, we're in Switzerland in mountains, so it was never getting that hot, even in those temperatures. And I wasn't continuously recording, although I was shooting a lot of 5.1K at 50 frames, all handheld, all straight to the CF Express Type B card, and of course using the internal battery. So kind of doing all the wrong things to get the best battery life out of this, but I never had any overheating warnings whatsoever in that time. Now, I've used this for a couple of professional shoots as well. One was doing some highlights of an event, and there was no issues during that. It had no overheating concerns once again. You know, it was a warm day here in the UK, probably similar again, but it was indoors, so we did an interview, wasn't a problem, and then after that also wasn't a problem doing everything else. And then the other shoot we were doing was effectively a little product shoot where we were in a very hot office space for a whole day, continuously recording either at high frame rates or high resolutions all day. And it was pretty non-stop, actually, that filming. We had a lot to do in a very short space of time. Yes, it wasn't continuously recording. It was recording quite a bit as we did multiple takes and kept going. And despite the room temperature probably being 27, 28 degrees at the time, it was absolutely fine. Once again, didn't have any issues. Now, of course, I will keep an eye on this. I am someone who shoots in very hot locations. I will be going back to places like Dubai, and I'll hopefully take this camera with me, and I will test it. I will report back any issues that I have with overheating, and as soon as it does that, I will make sure I get a video of it and share with you guys. I think it's one of those things that you just have to keep using and seeing what situations it's going to work in and which ones it won't. Clearly, we've seen from people testing already, there are situations this camera can overheat in and where you've got to be a bit more cautious. I think if I was someone who shot weddings in a relatively hot place and there was a lot of outdoor weddings, I would not pick this camera up. I just would avoid it because it's just not worth the risk, especially on something like a wedding. There are plenty of other cameras out there that you can pick up and they will do the job absolutely fine. You don't need to pick this particular camera up. That said, I think for most other people shooting corporate work, anything that you're doing that's on a regular basis, and just generally not shooting at 50 plus frames per second for long periods of time at high resolutions, then I think this camera won't have any problems whatsoever. I don't have any concerns about using this on professional shoots as long as you're working within the realistic limitations you'd expect to use this camera in. Maybe that's being too kind to it. Maybe I should be more critical of its overheating. And yeah, it shouldn't overheat, to be honest. It's got the built-in fan. Panasonic could have made it ensure that it wouldn't overheat by having a slightly larger body. But personally, I have not had any issues whatsoever. And unless I'm in very extreme situations, I don't really foresee any concerns of overheating coming up anytime soon. So when it comes to switching from the Sony FX3 to the S1 Mark II, is that something that we are seriously considering doing? Am I going to pick up one or two more of these cameras and basically go full on Lumix into the future? Honestly, right now, I'm not sure. Not because this camera isn't good enough, not because this camera couldn't do the job that it needs to do, but more really just financially, and is it worth it? Is it needed? Our Sony cameras work absolutely fine. They work really well. We've got good lenses for them, and I don't feel the need necessarily to fully switch away from that system. That said, there'll be many benefits of having one single camera setup and one lens mount, and I quite like the idea of going all L mount, so that maybe in the future, when we pick up hopefully a Pixar's 12K, then we've got matching lenses, or at least a matching lens mount that we can work with. So there's definitely good arguments to switch fully to Panasonic and fully to the S1 Mark II. But right now, I'm not fully committed to doing it. Maybe in a month or two, when I've really got to use this camera and I've used it in some really more extreme environments, I can make a stronger decision on that. But certainly I'm in a lucky position where I don't need to make a big decision on switching one way or another right away. And I would say, because of where these cameras are right now with everyone, unless you have a really strong need, I wouldn't worry too much about switching straight away. I would think about it. Maybe it's worth considering, but it isn't going to be a game changer. Certainly in terms of final image quality that you're going to get out of this camera compared to what you already own, it's probably not going to be a big blow away upgrade from where you are currently. If that's what you think you're going to get out of this, you'll be quite disappointed, because it isn't going to give you something you can't already get out of existing cameras that you probably already own. Would I upgrade from the S5 Mark II to this camera? Once again, that's a difficult decision to make, whether it's worth it or whether you should just pick up a second S5 Mark II, because they are extremely affordable. I still think, in terms of value for money and a reliable, professional, mirrorless camera, the S5 Mark II is really hard to beat. There are, of course, some really nice features in this camera that camera doesn't have, and once you've used them, it's hard to go back to not having them. But that said, there's no reason why you can't make a good living out of the S5 Mark II. And I would only really upgrade if you can really financially justify the upgrade. I wouldn't kind of go into massive debt just to try and upgrade your camera system. If you're really interested in knowing more about my usage with this camera, then make sure you like and subscribe to my channel, because I'll be doing plenty more videos as I learn this camera better, as I rig it out how I wish. And I'll obviously do any honest discussions about how it's been over that time period. There's going to be a lot of extreme situations I'll be using this camera in, and it's going to be really fascinating to see whether this camera can keep holding up and working in all the different environments that we send it into, or whether I'll end up going back to using my Sony gear as my #1 camera choice. Let's see how that goes. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.